What do you mean there's a woman living in our house? I asked, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The neighbor's voice on the other end was apologetic, but firm. I didn't want to bother you during the funeral, Caroline. But she's been here 3 days now, moving furniture in, redecorating. Your husband told everyone she's an interior designer, but the way they act around each other. I thought you should know. As I stood outside the funeral home where I had just laid my mother to rest, my world collapsed for the second time in a week. I had no idea that the security system I installed 6 months ago would not only capture my husband's betrayal, but become my salvation in ways I never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather seats of my rental car felt cold against my skin as I sat paralyzed in the funeral home parking lot. Around me, the last mourners were driving away, offering sympathetic waves I barely registered through my windshield. My mother, my rock, my confidant, my biggest supporter, was gone after a brief but brutal battle with pancreatic cancer. And now, apparently, my marriage was imploding while I was too deep in grief to have noticed the warning signs. I had spent the past week in Asheville arranging my mother's funeral, sorting through her modest belongings, and handling the preliminary paperwork that follows death with such cruel efficiency. My husband, Daniel, had flown in for the service but left immediately after, citing an urgent project deadline at his architectural firm in Portland. The Wilson development can't move forward without the revised plans, he'd explained, kissing my forehead. I'm sorry, Caro. I'll have everything ready when you get home. Everything ready indeed. I dialed our home security app with trembling fingers, grateful for the system I'd insisted on installing after a break-in down the street last year. Daniel had called it paranoid overkill for our upscale neighborhood. Now I understood his resistance. The app connected, displaying our living room in real time. The space I had carefully curated over 7 years of marriage was transformed. My earth-toned sectional had been replaced by a sleek white leather monstrosity. The vintage coffee table we'd found at that charming antique store in Selwood, gone. Abstract art I'd never seen hung where family photos once lived. And there, moving casually through what had become a stranger's home, was a willowy blonde woman in yoga pants, arranging flowers on a dining table I didn't recognize. I watched, a surreal detachment washing over me, as the front door opened, and Daniel walked in carrying takeout bags. The blonde approached him with the easy familiarity of established intimacy. Their kiss wasn't brief or casual. It was the kiss of people who had been together far longer than the week I'd been gone. I installed the security system 6 months ago, I whispered to myself, fingers navigating to the recorded history. How far back did this go? The question burned through my shock, igniting something primal and focused within me. The footage, from the day I left for Asheville, answered with brutal clarity. 3 hours after my departure, 3 hours, a moving truck had appeared in our driveway. The next sequence of recordings documented my life being systematically erased and replaced. My belongings boxed up and carried out by movers, new furniture arriving. Daniel and the blonde woman, directing traffic, laughing, celebrating with champagne in my kitchen as the transformation neared completion. I was Caroline Weber, 38, a museum curator specializing in contemporary American art in Portland, Oregon. My career had flourished over the past decade through precise attention to detail, careful authentication of acquisitions, and an instinct for recognizing the genuine article versus clever forgeries. Yet somehow, I had failed to authenticate my own husband's fidelity or recognize the forgery our marriage had become. Daniel and I had met during a gallery installation he was designing. I was drawn to his creative vision, the way he could transform spaces to perfectly showcase the art they contained. We complemented each other, my eye for historical significance and provenance balancing his modern, minimalist aesthetic. When We found our 1930s Tudor-style home 5 years ago. We agreed it would be our forever project, a place that honored architectural history while embracing contemporary living. Now I watched through digital surveillance as strangers occupied that carefully crafted dream. The most devastating footage wasn't the moving day or the redecorating. It was from 3 weeks earlier, Daniel giving this woman a tour of our home while I was at a weekend conference in Seattle. His body language in the recording was unmistakable. The proprietary hand at the small of her back, the intimate way he showed her the master bedroom, the conspiratorial planning evident in their gestures toward walls and windows. This wasn't a sudden infatuation. This was calculated replacement. I forced myself to keep watching, each recording strengthening my resolve rather than breaking it further. Sometimes in art authentication, the most important evidence lies in what was painted over, in the layers hidden beneath the surface. I needed to see every layer of this betrayal. A text from Daniel interrupted my surveillance. How was the service? Still planning to fly back Thursday? The casual normality of it, the sheer audacity, finally broke through my shock. A sound escaped me that I barely recognized, something between a laugh and a sob. He was confirming my arrival to coordinate the disappearance of his mistress and the restoration of our home to its previous state. I would never have known, coming home to everything seemingly normal, that another woman had been living in my space, sleeping in my bed, planning a future with my husband. Except now I did know. And knowledge, as I often told museum patrons, is the most valuable artifact of all. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I booked an earlier flight back to Portland for the following morning. The tactical part of my brain, the part that organized major exhibitions and authenticated valuable acquisitions, was taking control, methodically categorizing what I knew and what I needed to learn. What I knew. My husband had moved another woman into our home while I buried my mother. This relationship predated my departure by at least 3 weeks, and possibly much longer. They were confident enough in their future to empty our house of my belongings. What I needed to learn. Where? Were my possessions? What legal exposure did I have regarding our home and joint accounts? Who exactly was this woman? I opened my banking app, dreading what I might find. The joint checking account seemed normal at first glance. Regular bills, grocery purchases, nothing unusual. But our savings account, which had contained nearly $87,000 earmarked for a kitchen renovation, now showed a balance of $12,341. A transfer of $75,000 had been made 6 days ago to an account I didn't recognize. I felt my breath catch. 6 days ago, I had been sitting beside my mother's hospital bed, holding her hand during her final hours. While I watched her labored breathing, counted the seconds between each inhale with increasing dread, my husband had been transferring our savings to fund. What? The next moment delivered the answer as I scrolled through my email, searching for bank notifications I'd missed during the chaos of the past week. There, buried among condolence messages and funeral arrangement confirmations, was an alert from our mortgage company. Your application for a home equity line of credit has been approved. I hadn't applied for any such thing. With growing horror, I found the attached documents. The HELOC was for $350,000 against our property. The approval included a digitized version of my signature, a reasonable facsimile, but, to my expert eye, clearly forged. Certain loops were wrong, the pressure points inconsistent with my natural hand. My professional life had taught me that the provenance of an object, its origin story, its chain of ownership, its authenticated journey, was often as valuable as the object itself. Now I needed to establish the provenance of this forgery, this theft, this betrayal that had unfolded while I performed the sacred duty of laying my mother to rest. I checked into an airport hotel, unable to face the long drive back to my mother's empty house. Sleep eluded me, but clarity arrived in its place. By morning, I had a plan. Not born of vengeance or emotional reaction, but built on the same methodical foundation I used to curate priceless collections. As my plane took off the next day, I realized that while I had lost my mother, the woman who had taught me resilience, integrity, and self-respect, I was about to demonstrate how well I had learned those lessons. Daniel had underestimated me. People often did. In the art world, I had built my reputation on recognizing value others missed and exposing forgeries others accepted as authentic. It was time to apply those skills to my own life. My plane touched down in Portland under a silver-gray sky that matched my emotional state, cool, controlled, and ready to precipitate at any moment. I had used the flight to research Oregon's property laws, document forgery statutes, and the legal implications of unauthorized HELOCs. Knowledge had always been my shield and strategy. This situation would be no different. Rather than heading directly home, I took a rideshare to my office at the Portland Museum of Contemporary Art. The Wednesday morning quiet of the administrative wing provided the perfect base of operations. My colleagues were accustomed to my irregular hours when preparing new exhibitions, and no one questioned my presence despite my bereavement leave. At my desk, surrounded by the familiar tools of my professional life, catalog references, authentication, guides, provenance documentation, I began building a case as meticulously as I would for a major acquisition. First, I needed to establish a timeline and gather all financial records. I printed the forged HELOC application, studying my supposed signature with professional detachment. The forgery was skillful but detectable to my trained eye. I'd spent years analyzing brushstrokes and signature patterns of artists both renowned and obscure. This analysis was no different, looking for pressure points, hesitation marks, and flow patterns that revealed authenticity or deception. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Next, I called our bank, requesting all records of recent large transactions. The customer service representative expressed condolences for my mother's passing. News travels quickly in professional circles and helped me access detailed records without alerting Daniel to my inquiry. The $75,000 transfer had gone to a newly opened account under both our names, though I had never signed any paperwork authorizing it. I also see a wire transfer from the HELOC funds, the representative noted. Processed 4 days ago to Northwest. Premier Properties, would you like the transaction details? Yes, please, I replied, maintaining my professional tone while my heart raced. The amount, $325,000, nearly the entire available credit from our home equity line. And could you tell me if there have been any changes to contact information on our accounts recently? There had been. The primary contact phone number for notifications had been changed to one I didn't recognize. The email address for electronic statements had been switched from our shared family account to Daniel's personal one. The systematic isolation of our financial communications was as deliberate as it was damning. I thanked the representative and ended the call, then searched Northwest Premier Properties online. Their website featured luxury condominiums in the Pearl District, sleek, modern spaces in a newly developed high-rise with amenities, including a rooftop pool, concierge service, and panoramic views of the city. Everything Daniel had claimed to find pretentious when we were house hunting. The most recent completed sale was Unit 1507, a 2-bedroom corner unit sold 4 days ago for exactly $342,500. The timing aligned perfectly with the wire transfer. I called the property management company, adopting the pleasant but authoritative tone I used when negotiating art loans from private collectors. This is Caroline Weber. My husband, Daniel Weber, recently purchased Unit 1507, and I'm trying to coordinate some deliveries. Could you confirm the unit number and any special instructions for accessing the building? Of course, Mrs. Weber, the receptionist replied without hesitation. Unit 1507 is registered to Daniel Weber and Megan Ross. We have you listed as an authorized visitor, so you can access the building anytime with photo ID. Would you like the concierge number to arrange your delivery? Megan Ross. The name sliced through me with clinical precision. Not just a nameless blonde in security footage anymore, but a person with an identity. A person co-owning property with my husband, purchased with money secured against our home through my forged signature. That would be helpful, thank you. I replied, maintaining my composure as I wrote down the number I had no intention of calling. A quick social media search revealed Megan Ross was an interior designer who had worked with Daniel's firm on several recent projects. Her professional profile showed a striking blonde woman in her early 30s with an impressive portfolio of minimalist designs, including the Wilson development project Daniel had rushed back to Portland to handle. The pieces were arranging themselves with devastating clarity. I needed just one more critical element, irrefutable proof of the forgery. I called Lucas Harmon, an authentication specialist I occasionally consulted for the museum when evaluating suspicious signatures on artwork documentation. His expertise had saved us from several costly acquisition mistakes over the years. "Caroline, I was so sorry to hear about your mother," he said when he answered. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Lucas, but I need your professional expertise on a personal matter," I explained. "I have a document with my signature that I believe was forged. I need official analysis and documentation." Lucas agreed to meet me immediately. His small office near the university was filled with specialized equipment for document analysis, magnifiers, special lighting, comparison software. I presented him with several authenticated samples of my signature alongside the HELOC application. He spent 40 minutes conducting a thorough examination before delivering his conclusion. "This is definitely not your authentic signature," he stated, pointing to specific inconsistencies. "The pressure points are wrong. The connecting strokes show hesitation, and the terminal marks lack your characteristic upward flick. Someone studied your signature and practiced it, but it's a simulation, not genuine." "Would you be willing to provide a formal statement to that effect?" "Absolutely. I'll prepare a detailed analysis report with comparative images and authentication markers. You'll have it by tomorrow morning." He paused, studying my face. "Caroline, this looks like a legal document. Is everything okay?" "It will be," I assured him, not yet ready to share the full situation. "The report will help ensure that." My next stop was the office of Patricia Vega, a family law attorney whose reputation for handling complex financial cases made her the perfect counsel for my situation. I'd met her at a museum fundraiser the previous year and had been impressed by her incisive intelligence. Patricia listened without interruption as I methodically presented the evidence I'd gathered: the security footage showing the other woman moving in, the bank records, the property purchase, and the pending forgery analysis. "He's been planning this for months," she concluded when I finished. "The level of premeditation is extraordinary. Changing contact information, forging your signature, timing the property purchase during your mother's funeral. This isn't an impulsive affair. It's calculated fraud." "What are my options?" I asked. "Multiple," she replied, her tone as precise as her immaculate suit. "The forgery alone is criminal fraud. The unauthorized HELOC against jointly owned property gives us grounds for immediate financial injunction. The documented timeline during your bereavement adds a particularly egregious element that will work strongly in your favor in divorce proceedings." She outlined a strategy that was aggressive but measured, focused on protecting my financial interests and securing my portion of our assets rather than punitive action against Daniel. But she also noted that the forgery had implications beyond our divorce. "The bank will likely pursue criminal charges once the forgery is reported," she explained. "That's outside the divorce proceedings but could result in serious consequences for your husband." The thought of Daniel facing criminal charges should have brought satisfaction, but instead produced a strange hollowness. this was the man who had held me through my father's death 5 years earlier, who had created beautiful spaces that showcased the art I loved, who had once represented safety and partnership in my life. Now he was a stranger who had violated not just my trust, but the law. I need some time to process this, I told Patricia. Let's prepare everything but hold on formal filings until tomorrow. She nodded, understanding the weight of the decisions before me. Take the evening to consider your priorities. We can meet again in the morning to finalize our approach. As I left her office, the sun was breaking through Portland's persistent clouds, casting long afternoon shadows across the city streets. I checked into a downtown hotel using my personal credit card, one Daniel couldn't monitor, and requested a room on a high floor. From 15 stories up, I could see across the city to the West Hills where our Tudor home nestled among old-growth trees. In the opposite direction stood the gleaming new high-rise in the Pearl District, where Unit 1507 now belonged to Daniel and Megan. I ordered room service and spread my gathered evidence across the king-sized bed, creating a visual timeline of betrayal. The methodical organization helped maintain my emotional equilibrium. This was a problem to solve, a situation to authenticate and address, not just a heart to heal. My phone buzzed with another text from Daniel. Haven't heard from you. Flight still on schedule for tomorrow? I can pick you up at the airport. The casual normality of it was almost impressive. The confident assumption that I remained ignorant, that his carefully constructed deception remained intact. In that moment, I recognized something fundamental. This confidence wasn't new. It had likely characterized our entire relationship in ways I was only beginning to understand. How many other deceptions had I missed? How many late nights at the office had been spent with Megan? How many business trips had been covers for their developing relationship? The security system had only been installed 6 months ago. What had occurred in the years before that remained unrecorded but suddenly suspect. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I opened the security app again, watching the real-time feed of our home, my home. Daniel moved through the kitchen, phone in hand, likely wondering why I hadn't answered. Megan was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she was already at the new condo, preparing their actual home while Daniel maintained the facade of our marriage. Tomorrow, that facade would shatter. But tonight, I needed to decide exactly how I wanted that to happen. Not from a place of reactive emotion, but from clear-eyed assessment of the future I wanted to build from these unexpected ruins. As darkness fell over Portland, I stood at the hotel window watching lights illuminate across the city landscape. I had spent my career ensuring that valuable things were exactly what they claimed to be. Now, I needed to apply that same scrutiny to my own life, separating authentic value from skillful forgery, determining what was worth preserving and what needed to be exposed for the fraud it was. Morning arrived with the clarity that often follows a night of careful consideration. I had barely slept, but fatigue couldn't penetrate the focused determination that now drove me. I contacted Patricia Vega at precisely 8 a.m., confirming our strategy before collecting Lucas Harmon's completed forgery analysis report. By 9:30, I had set several legal proceedings in motion: an emergency injunction freezing the remaining HELOC funds, formal documentation of the forgery submitted to the bank's fraud department, and preliminary divorce papers prepared but not yet filed. These were preventative measures, establishing legal protection before confrontation. I'd learned in my museum work that provenance disputes were won not just through authenticating the genuine article, but by decisively establishing concrete evidence before opposing parties could conceal or alter it. The bank has placed a freeze on the remaining funds, Patricia confirmed during our morning call. They're initiating their own investigation, which will proceed regardless of whether you pursue criminal charges against Daniel. I considered this inevitability. And if I choose not to press charges personally, that would be your decision, she replied carefully. But financial institutions take forgery seriously. Once their investigation confirms what the expert analysis shows, they're likely to pursue the matter independently. I thanked her and ended the call, contemplating the irony. Daniel's actions had set in motion consequences that would unfold, with or without my participation. Like the careful removal of a painting's later overpaint to reveal the original work beneath, the process of exposing his deception had developed its own momentum. My next step required both strategic timing and unassailable evidence. I called my closest friend and colleague, Eliza Santos, the museum's photography conservator. "I need your help with something unusual," I explained after summarizing the situation. "The security footage is crucial evidence, but I need it properly authenticated and preserved." Eliza was silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what I'd shared. "I'll help however I can. Should we involve the museum's IT department as well?" "Please. I want chain of custody documentation for every file. Full metadata preservation, timestamp verification, everything." 2 hours later, I sat in Eliza's conservation lab with Martin Chen from IT, watching them extract, authenticate, and preserve the security footage with the same meticulous care they would apply to a damaged daguerreotype or fragile digital installation. "We've verified the timestamps against server records," Martin confirmed. "The footage has not been altered or edited. We've created certified copies with authentication hashes to prevent any claim of tampering." Eliza reached across the workstation to squeeze my hand. "Caroline, I'm so sorry this is happening, especially right after losing your mother." Her genuine compassion nearly cracked my professional composure. My mother had always warned me that my greatest strength, analytical detachment, could also be my greatest vulnerability if it prevented me from processing emotional truth. "Don't catalog your feelings, Caroline," she'd say. "Experience them." "Thank you," I managed, allowing myself one moment of vulnerability before refocusing. "I need one more thing. Real-time monitoring of the security feeds for the next few hours. I'm confronting Daniel today, and I want independent witnesses to what transpires." They exchanged glances, immediately understanding the implications. "We'll set up a secure monitoring station," Martin offered. "Everything will be recorded with authentication protocols active." With technical preparations complete, I turned to personal ones. From my emergency suitcase in my office closet, packed months ago for unexpected exhibition courier trips, I selected a charcoal gray suit that projected authority without aggression. Simple pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother completed the ensemble. Looking in the mirror, I recognized her influence in my composed expression. Strength without brittleness, determination without rage. I texted Daniel, "Flight arrived early. Coming home now. See you soon." His reply was immediate. "Great. Can't wait to see you. Any requests for dinner?" The casual domesticity of his response, maintaining the fiction even in private communication, confirmed the depth of his comfortable deception. He genuinely believed his elaborate fraud remained undetected, that I would walk through our front door none the wiser about the woman who had been sleeping in my bed, the assets that had been diverted, the life that had been systematically dismantled during my mother's final days. I drove a rental car to our neighborhood, parking 2 blocks from our house to observe before entering. The moving truck I half expected wasn't present. Either they hadn't planned to restore the house to its previous state before my arrival, or they'd anticipated a different timeline for doing so. Patricia had offered to accompany me or to have a private investigator present, but I had declined. This confrontation needed to happen on my terms, with the invisible but irrefutable witness of the security system recording every word, every reaction, every truth finally exposed to light. At precisely 2 r.p.m., I walked up the fieldstone path to our front door. I paused, noticing unfamiliar potted plants flanking the entrance where my hydrangeas had previously grown. Using my key, I entered what had once been my home. The interior. Transformation was even more complete than the security footage had suggested. The warm, eclectic space filled with artifacts from my global travels and carefully selected artwork had been replaced by a minimalist showcase that could have been lifted directly from a design magazine. All sharp angles, monochromatic textiles, and strategic accent pieces without history or personal significance. Daniel emerged from his home office, his practiced smile faltering slightly at my unexpected arrival time. He quickly recovered, moving to embrace me. "Caro, I thought your flight was later. I would have picked you up." He kissed my cheek, his cologne unfamiliar, another small betrayal among the larger ones. I sidestepped his embrace, maintaining professional distance as I surveyed the transformed space. "The house looks different." His explanation was ready, delivered with rehearsed casualness. "I thought you might like a surprise after everything you've been through. Had a design team come in for a refresh. What do you think?" The audacity of the lie was almost admirable in its boldness. In that moment, I understood that Daniel hadn't just betrayed me. He had fundamentally underestimated me. He had mistaken my methodical nature for naivety, my focus on authentication for a lack of perception, my professional courtesy for personal blindness. "Where are my things?" I asked simply. "In storage," he replied smoothly. "I knew you'd want to sort through everything yourself, decide what works with the new aesthetic." I nodded, moving through the space with the deliberate attention I would give a new exhibition, noting details, assessing context. "And where is Megan?" The name landed between us like a dropped vase on marble flooring, the shattering of pretense into irreparable fragments. Daniel's expression shifted from practiced concern to momentary shock, then calculated recovery. "Who?" he attempted, but the performance had faltered, the facade cracking to reveal the deception beneath. "Megan Ross," I clarified, my voice steady. "The woman who's been living here while I buried my mother, the co-owner of Unit 1507 in the Pearl District, the beneficiary of the $342,500 wire transfer from our fraudulently obtained home equity line of credit." Daniel's face registered a series of emotions in rapid succession. Shock at my knowledge, calculation of possible explanations, assessment of deniability. I recognized these micro-expressions from years of watching collectors. Confronted with questions about questionable provenance. "Caroline, I can explain," he began, adopting a placating tone. "The condo is an investment property. Megan is a colleague who helped identify the opportunity. The market in the Pearl is exploding and—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "The security?" "System recorded everything, Daniel. Megan moving in, your physical relationship, the systematic replacement of my belongings, the champagne celebration in our kitchen, the discussions about your future together in this house." His expression hardened, strategy shifting from denial to justification. "You were never here, Caroline. Always at the museum, always focused on your precious artifacts. Our marriage was just another acquisition in your collection, cataloged, displayed, but never really lived in." The accusation might have wounded me once, but now it simply confirmed what I already understood, that Daniel had constructed a narrative to justify his actions, rewriting our history to support his present choices. "Perhaps," I acknowledged, refusing to be drawn into defensive posturing. "But that doesn't explain the forgery of my signature on the HELOC application, or the transfer of our savings while my mother was dying, or the deliberate changing of contact information on our accounts." I removed Lucas Harmon's analysis report from my portfolio, placing it on the unfamiliar glass coffee table that had replaced the antique oak piece where I'd once arranged exhibition catalogs and art books. "This is a professional authentication analysis of the signature on the HELOC application. It confirms forgery. The bank has already frozen the remaining funds and initiated their own investigation." Daniel's demeanor shifted again, the confident manipulator replaced by the calculating risk assessor. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone newly pragmatic. "I want what's rightfully mine," I replied. "Not revenge, not punishment, just equitable separation with proper accounting for all. Assets acquired during our marriage, including the Pearl District condo purchased with funds secured against our joint property through documented fraud." I placed Patricia Vega's business card beside the forgery report. "My attorney will contact yours tomorrow to begin formal proceedings. The divorce filing includes documentation of the timeline, your activities during my mother's funeral, the unauthorized financial transactions, the systematic removal of my possessions." Daniel picked up the card, studying it as though it might contain hidden information. "This seems unnecessarily aggressive. We could handle this privately, without bringing in outsiders. I'm willing to be generous in the settlement." Generous. I repeated the word, its inadequacy hanging in the air between us. Was it generosity that motivated you to transfer our savings while I sat at my mother's deathbed? Was it generosity that inspired you to forge my signature rather than have an honest conversation about ending our marriage? Before he could respond, the front door opened. Megan entered, stopping abruptly when she saw me. Her expression cycled through surprise, alarm, and finally defiant composure. "You must be Caroline," she said, recovering quickly. "Daniel said you wouldn't be back until tomorrow." "Evidently, Daniel says many things that aren't entirely accurate," I replied, maintaining professional courtesy despite the surreality of the encounter. Including his marital status when beginning relationships, his financial transparency when purchasing property, and his legal authority when signing documents on my behalf. Megan's gaze shifted to Daniel, questioning. His responding look contained warning, a silent plea for discretion that confirmed my suspicions. She likely knew nothing about the forgery or the precarious legal situation her new relationship now occupied. "I think you should leave," Daniel told me, his tone hardening. "I agree," I responded calmly, "but I'm not the one who will be leaving." I removed the preliminary injunction from my portfolio, placing it beside the forgery report. This emergency court order prohibits the transfer or disposal of any jointly owned assets, including this property, until legal proceedings are complete. It specifically names this house as my primary residence and requires that you vacate the premises within 24 hours. The shock on both their faces might have been satisfying under different circumstances. Now it simply confirmed the completeness of their mutual delusion, the belief that their actions would have no significant consequences, that their narrative would remain unchallenged, that I would somehow fade conveniently from the picture they had composed for themselves. "You can't do this," Megan began, looking to Daniel for confirmation. "Actually, I can," I corrected gently. "And I have. The court order is already in effect. The security system that recorded your arrival 3 hours after my departure for my mother's funeral will continue recording to ensure compliance with the order." I gathered my portfolio, leaving the documents on the table. "I'll return tomorrow afternoon. I expect to find the premises vacated by both of you, as stipulated in the order." As I turned to leave, Daniel made one final attempt. "Caro, please. We need to talk about this reasonably. There's so much you don't understand about what happened. What's been happening for years." I paused at the door, allowing myself one moment of genuine response rather than strategic calculation. "You're right, Daniel. There is much I don't understand. I don't understand how the man who held my hand at my father's funeral could transfer our savings while I held my mother's hand at hers. I don't understand how someone could plan another person's complete replacement with such meticulous attention to detail. Most of all, I don't understand why you didn't simply ask for a divorce instead of constructing this elaborate fraud." His expression revealed nothing resembling remorse, only frustration at plans disrupted, calculations invalidated. "I'll see you both in court," I concluded, closing the door on what had once been my life, and walking with measured steps back to my rental car. The following morning dawned with unexpected clarity. I had returned to my hotel room after the confrontation, half expecting to collapse under the emotional weight of the encounter. Instead, I experienced a curious lightness. Not happiness, certainly, but the unmistakable sensation of having set down a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. I contacted Patricia to confirm that the court order had been properly served and recorded. She assured me that the legal mechanisms were firmly in place, then asked how I was processing everything. Surprisingly well, I admitted. I expected to feel devastated, but instead I feel clear. That clarity is valuable, she observed. Many clients in your situation struggle to separate emotion from strategy. Your ability to maintain perspective will serve you well through these proceedings. After our call, I spent several hours updating my financial documentation, creating a comprehensive inventory of personal possessions removed from the house, and researching secure storage facilities where such items might reasonably be held. If Daniel had been truthful about one thing, that my belongings were in storage rather than discarded, I needed to locate and reclaim them. By mid-morning, I had scheduled meetings with my bank to separate our accounts, contacted a locksmith to change the home security codes and door locks, and arranged for a security service to monitor the property temporarily. These practical arrangements provided structure to emotions still too complex to fully process. At noon, Lucas Harmon called with an unexpected development. "Caroline, I've been reviewing the forgery analysis more thoroughly, and I've found something interesting," he began. "The signature on the HELOC application shares distinctive characteristics with other documents you provided for comparison. Specifically, the anomalies appear in the same locations." Meaning? Meaning the forger likely practiced using specific documents as models. Based on the patterns, I believe they worked from your signature on our museum consultation contract from last year and your signature on the property tax documents from 2 years ago. This detail might seem insignificant in the larger context of Daniel's deception, but it provided crucial insight into his methodology. He hadn't merely observed my signature in passing. He had deliberately selected documents, studied them, and practiced the forgery with calculated precision. "Can you determine when this practice might have begun?" I asked. "Based on the level of skill in the final forgery, I'd estimate at least several months of preparation," Lucas replied. "This wasn't impulsive. It was methodically developed over time. Several months, while we shared meals and a bed, while we discussed renovation plans and career developments, while we maintained the external appearance of partnership, Daniel had been secretly practicing my signature, preparing for the moment when he would use it to secure funds for his new life with Megan. This confirmation of premeditation should have deepened my sense of betrayal. Instead, it reinforced my growing recognition that the relationship I was mourning had likely never existed as I had understood it. The partnership I grieved was itself a forgery, a convincing simulation of connection that would not have withstood proper authentication. At 2 p.m., I returned to the house accompanied by a private investigator Patricia had recommended, an unobtrusive woman named Diane who specialized in documenting compliance with court orders. Her presence ensured independent verification of whatever we might encounter. The house appeared vacant from the exterior. No vehicles in the driveway, no lights visible through windows. I used my key one final time before the scheduled lock. Change. Entering what was now legally established as my sole residence until property division was finalized. The interior presented a surreal halfway state. Neither the home I had left nor the completely transformed space I had witnessed the previous day. Some of Megan's modern decorative elements remained, while others had been hastily removed, leaving conspicuous empty spaces on walls and surfaces. The white leather sectional was gone, replaced not by my original furniture, but by nothing at all, creating an awkward void in the living room. "I'll document the current state of each room," Diane said quietly, beginning a methodical photographic inventory of the property. I moved through the space with the detached attention of a curator assessing a newly acquired collection. The kitchen retained Megan's minimalist influence. My colorful ceramics and copper cookware replaced by sleek stainless steel and monochromatic dishes. The dining room stood empty, both my antique walnut table and Megan's glass and chrome replacement, conspicuously absent. Upstairs, the master bedroom had been partially restored to neutral condition. The bedding and decorative elements removed, leaving only the mattress and basic furniture. The bathroom revealed more hasty departure evidence. Lingering unfamiliar toiletries, a drawer partially emptied of contents, a damp towel left crumpled on the floor. The most revealing space was Daniel's home office. Unlike the other rooms, it remained largely unchanged from when I had left for my mother's funeral. His design references still lined the shelves, his ergonomic chair still positioned precisely, at the optimal distance from his monitor. This continuity suggested a telling hierarchy in his transition planning, personal comfort preserved amid the larger disruption. One significant addition caught my attention: a whiteboard calendar now, hung on the wall where I had previously displayed a textile art piece from Peru. The calendar detailed renovations planned for various rooms in the house, scheduled contractor visits, material delivery dates, design consultation appointments, all recorded in Daniel's distinctive architectural handwriting, all dated after what would have been my scheduled return. The systematic renovation planning confirmed what I had suspected. Daniel had never intended to restore the house to its previous state before my arrival. The transformation had been conceived as permanent, with my reaction to the changes presumably managed through some combination of deflection, gaslighting, and gradual acclimation to my diminished place in my own home. This calendar represented the most explicit evidence yet of Daniel's fundamental miscalculation, his assumption that I would somehow be manipulated into accepting these changes rather than questioning them, that I would prioritize maintaining our marriage over maintaining my dignity and autonomy, that I would, essentially, collaborate in my own erasure. As Diane continued her documentation, I checked the security system footage from overnight. It showed Daniel and Megan hastily packing items between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., loading Megan's car with smaller possessions while debating which larger pieces to leave behind. Their body language revealed tension, gestures more abrupt, conversation clearly strained. The fraud exposed, they were now negotiating the practical implications of its collapse. "Ms. Weber," Diane called from the guest bedroom, "you should see this." I joined her in what had once been my home office space, where I occasionally worked on exhibition catalogs and research. The room had been completely transformed into a design studio, drafting table, material samples, project boards, leaning against walls. Megan had clearly claimed this space as her professional territory, but Diane was pointing to something specific, a stack of mail on the small desk. "These appear to be unopened envelopes addressed to you." I examined the collection: bank statements, exhibition announcements from colleague institutions, a sympathy card from my mother's church group. Most significantly, a certified letter from our mortgage company regarding the HELOC application, dated 3 weeks earlier and marked second notice. "They intercepted your mail," Diane observed, photographing the evidence. "That's potentially mail fraud, a federal offense." The systematic nature of the deception continued to reveal itself in these details. Daniel hadn't merely taken advantage of my absence during a family crisis. He had been strategically managing information flow for weeks or months beforehand, ensuring I remained unaware of financial transactions that would have immediately raised questions. As we completed our inventory of the property, the locksmith arrived to change the exterior door locks and reprogram the security system. I provided him access codes known only to me, effectively securing the physical space against unauthorized return. "The security company will have a patrol car drive by every few hours for the next week," Diane confirmed as we prepared to leave. "All footage will continue to be backed up to secured cloud storage as evidence." I thanked her for her assistance, then took one final walk through the house, not as the home it had once been or the battleground it had momentarily become, but as a physical space I would need to re-inhabit and reclaim. The starkness of partially removed decor and absent furniture created an unexpected opportunity. Rather than restoring what had been before, I could create something entirely new. A space designed around my authentic preferences, rather than the compromises of partnership. The thought was simultaneously daunting and exhilarating. As I stood in the emptied living room, I recalled my mother's approach after my father's death. Rather than preserving their home as a memorial to their shared life, she had thoughtfully transformed it, keeping elements that genuinely reflected her individual taste while releasing those that had primarily been his preference or their compromise. Grief needs space to breathe, she had explained. Sometimes that means creating literal space around it. My phone chimed with a text from Daniel. "We've complied with the order. Can we talk about next steps without lawyers? There's a reasonable solution here." His persistent belief in reasonable solution was telling, the assumption that proper negotiation could somehow mitigate his actions, that the situation remained within the bounds of normal marital dissolution rather than criminal fraud. The fundamental disconnect wasn't just between his actions and basic ethics, but between his perception of those actions and their actual legal severity. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I contacted Eliza at the museum, asking about storage, space for artwork and artifacts during facility renovations. Her response was immediate and supportive. The museum's secure climate-controlled storage area had substantial unused capacity that I was welcome to access. "We could store your personal collection until you're ready to reinstall," she offered. "The conservation team would ensure everything is properly handled and documented." This solution addressed my immediate concern about locating and securing my personal belongings. If Daniel had indeed placed them in storage rather than disposing of them, I now had proper facilities to receive and protect them while I determined which pieces I wanted to reincorporate into my new living space. As I left the house, I noticed our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kaplan, watching from her front porch. She had been the first to alert me to Megan's presence, her concerned call puncturing the illusion Daniel had so carefully constructed. I crossed to her property, ready to express my gratitude for her intervention. Before I could speak, she enveloped me in an embrace that carried the warmth my clinical approach to the situation had necessarily deferred. "I've been so worried about you, dear," she said, patting my back. "First your mother, and then to come home to this." "Thank you for calling me," I replied, the simple acknowledgement inadequate for the service she had rendered. "If you hadn't, I might have walked into a situation completely unprepared." Mrs. Kaplan nodded, her expression reflecting both concern and indignation on my behalf. I knew something wasn't right. That woman was acting like she owned the place. From the moment she arrived, rearranging the garden, accepting package deliveries as Mrs. Weber, the audacity. Her outrage on my behalf was oddly comforting, external validation that my reaction wasn't disproportionate to the situation. "The trucks came yesterday," she added. "Late evening. They took so much furniture. Is anything left?" "Enough," I assured her. "And what's missing can be replaced." Her weathered hand squeezed mine. "That's the spirit. Things are just things. You're still you." This simple observation, delivered without pretension or calculated effect, resonated more deeply than the professional counsel or legal strategies that had occupied my recent hours. In the methodical process of documenting betrayal and securing assets, I had focused primarily on external evidence. Mrs. Kaplan's comment redirected my attention to the internal reality that ultimately mattered more. I was still me, not defined by my marriage or its dissolution, not diminished by Daniel's calculation or Megan's participation in my replacement, not reduced by the systematic removal of physical possessions that had represented my presence in shared space. As I drove away from the neighborhood, I finally responded to Daniel's text. All communication should go through our respective attorneys. The reasonable solution was available weeks ago. Honest conversation rather than elaborate fraud. That opportunity has passed. Then I directed my attention to immediate priorities. Temporary living arrangements while the house was properly secured, retrieving my belongings from whatever storage facility held them, and beginning the process of reimagining my living space, not as restoration of what had been, but as authentic expression of what could be. The ending of my marriage had been orchestrated by someone else, but its aftermath would be designed entirely by me. The locator card for public storage facility DAR 342 seemed incongruously ordinary given the circumstances that had led me to it. I had found it among the stack of intercepted mail in what had been my home office, tucked between cable bills and museum correspondence. The unit number and access code were handwritten in Daniel's precise architectural lettering, an unintentional gift that saved me considerable investigative effort. The storage facility occupied a former warehouse in the industrial district, its rows of identical roll-up doors giving no indication of the personal histories contained behind them. I provided my identification to the facility manager, explaining the unusual situation with as much professional detachment as I could muster. "I understand completely, Ms. Weber," she assured me after verifying my identification against their records. "The unit is registered under both names, so you have full access rights. Would you like me to accompany you?" I accepted her offer, appreciating both the procedural transparency and the subtle security of having a witness present. Unit number 342 was located toward the back of the facility, a large 10x20 space with high ceilings, suggesting Daniel had anticipated storing significant volume. When the manager raised the door, I was immediately struck by the methodical organization of the contents. Unlike the chaotic storage units I'd seen during museum collection acquisitions, this space displayed Daniel's architectural precision. Furniture had been carefully arranged and wrapped in protective coverings. Boxes were stacked according to size and labeled with irritatingly helpful specificity. Kitchen, ceramics, living room, books, office, research materials. "I'll be at the front desk if you need anything," the manager offered, sensing my need for privacy as I confronted this physical manifestation of my dismantled life. Alone among the carefully preserved pieces of my former existence, I experienced a complex emotion for which English lacks adequate vocabulary, something between vindication that my belongings had indeed been stored rather than discarded, and fresh betrayal at the methodical care with which my erasure had been executed. I began a systematic inventory, documenting each item with my phone's camera while checking condition and completeness. The process was familiar, reminiscent of cataloging new acquisitions or conducting collection assessments, but the personal nature of these particular artifacts complicated my usual professional detachment. My grandmother's hand-knotted Persian rug that had warmed our living room, the antique writing desk I'd restored during graduate school, the framed exhibition posters from shows I'd curated early in my career. Each piece carried memories and associations that transcended their material value. Among the carefully labeled boxes, I discovered one marked simply, "Caroline, Personal." Unlike the others in Daniel's handwriting, this had been labeled by someone else, Megan, presumably, based on the more flowing script. Its contents proved illuminating. Journals I'd kept during our early marriage, travel souvenirs from destinations visited together, photographs from happier times. The selective preservation of these nostalgic items suggested complexity in Megan's participation, perhaps discomfort with completely erasing evidence of my existence, or curiosity about the woman whose place she was taking. Whatever her motivation, this box represented a strange form of consideration in the midst of profound betrayal. As I continued my inventory, I noticed an anomaly, a small, fireproof document safe I didn't recognize, tucked between larger furniture pieces. It wasn't among my possessions, yet it had been placed in this storage unit containing exclusively my belongings. Curiosity overrode hesitation, and I examined it more closely. The safe wasn't locked, another oversight or perhaps intentional accessibility. Inside, I found a collection of documents organized with Daniel's characteristic precision. Property deeds, investment certificates, insurance policies. Most significantly, a manila folder labeled Westridge Commercial Development contained architectural plans, financial projections, and partnership agreements for a major project I'd never heard mentioned. According to the documentation, Daniel had been developing this commercial property venture for over 2 years, well before Megan entered the picture. The investment structure showed significant personal financial commitment, with Daniel listed as principal architect and holding 30% ownership stake. The projected completion date was 18 months away, with anticipated returns beginning thereafter. This discovery contextualized the financial maneuvers that had accompanied his personal betrayal. The HELOC funds hadn't simply financed a love nest with Megan. They represented capital investment in a professional opportunity Daniel had concealed throughout our marriage, a parallel ambition developed alongside his parallel relationship. Further examination revealed additional documents, a rental agreement for a commercial studio space in my name, lease beginning 2 months earlier, life insurance policies listing Megan as beneficiary, established 6 months ago, applications for business loans using our home as collateral, prepared but not yet submitted. Each document illuminated another facet of Daniel's comprehensive exit strategy, a meticulously planned transition from our marriage to his new life, constructed over months or years rather than weeks. The scope of premeditation was breathtaking, suggesting a compartmentalization so complete it bordered on pathological. My phone chimed with a message from Patricia. Bank Fraud Department completed preliminary investigation. Criminal charges likely to be filed within 48 hours unless you specifically request otherwise. Please call to discuss options. The timing of this notification, arriving amid my archaeological excavation of Daniel's elaborate deception, created perfect symmetry. As I uncovered the extent of his planning, external consequences were simultaneously advancing toward him, constructed from his own actions rather than my initiative. I called Patricia immediately, standing among the physical evidence of my dismantled life. I've discovered additional documentation, I explained, describing the contents of the unrecognized safe. There appears to be an undisclosed commercial development project requiring significant capital investment. That explains the urgency behind the HELOC, Patricia noted. He needed immediate funding for this project and chose fraud rather than honest negotiation or proper financing. She paused, then addressed the pending criminal charges. The bank is required to report financial fraud of this magnitude to authorities. However, as the apparent victim of the forgery, your cooperation will significantly impact how aggressively they pursue the case. What are my options? I asked, maintaining the analytical approach that had sustained me thus far. You could formally request they not pursue criminal charges, though they're not obligated to honor that request. You could decline to cooperate with prosecution while not actively opposing it. Or you could fully cooperate, providing testimony and evidence that would substantially strengthen their case. I considered these alternatives while surveying the storage unit containing my carefully preserved yet decisively removed possessions. The professional opportunity documented in that unexpected safe had evidently been important enough to Daniel that he risked criminal fraud to finance it. His architectural ambitions had apparently justified elaborate deception rather than straightforward negotiation about funding. I need time to consider, I told Patricia. Can you ask the bank to delay filing for 24 hours while I review these new documents more thoroughly? After ending the call, I continued methodically photographing and cataloging the storage unit. Contents, arranging for the museum's conservation team to transport selected artwork and fragile items to their climate-controlled facility. The remaining furniture and household goods would be moved to a separate storage unit under my sole control until I determined which pieces I wanted to reincorporate into my reclaimed home. As I completed this practical task, my thoughts circled back to the criminal charges question. Daniel's actions objectively constituted fraud, identity theft, and possible mail tampering. The evidence was unambiguous, the financial impact significant, the premeditation extensive. By any reasonable metric, these actions warranted legal consequences. Yet I found myself hesitating, not from lingering emotional attachment or misplaced loyalty, but from emerging clarity about what I truly wanted from this situation. Criminal prosecution would certainly deliver justice in abstract terms, but would it deliver the specific outcomes most important to my future well-being? I locked the storage unit and returned to my hotel, spreading the discovered documents across the desk to analyze them more thoroughly. The Westridge commercial development represented significant potential, both financially for its investors and professionally for Daniel as its architectural visionary. Construction had already begun according to the progress reports, with substantial completion scheduled within 12 months. This project clearly represented Daniel's professional dream, the culmination of ambitions he had apparently felt unable to pursue openly within our marriage. Rather than discussing these aspirations or negotiating support, he had chosen elaborate deception, seemingly convinced that I would somehow hinder rather than help his professional advancement. This assumption revealed perhaps the most fundamental betrayal beneath the more obvious ones, his belief that our partnership was inherently constraining rather than supportive, that my participation in his life limited rather than expanded his possibilities. This misperception said more about his character than any of the specific actions that followed from it. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Caroline, this is Megan Ross. We need to talk about what's happening with Daniel. Please, call me." The message included a phone number and the plea, "It's important." My initial impulse was to ignore this unexpected communication. What could possibly be gained from conversation with the woman who had participated in my replacement? Yet professional curiosity overrode emotional resistance. Understanding Megan's perspective might provide valuable context for decisions I still needed to make. I called the number, maintaining the composed professional tone I'd cultivated throughout this ordeal. "This is Caroline Weber. You asked me to call." "Thank you for calling back." Megan's voice carried tension rather than the confidence I'd observed in our brief in-person encounter. "I need to clarify something important. I had no knowledge of the financial fraud or the forged documents. Daniel told me you were separated and had agreed to the property arrangements." This claim of ignorance, while convenient, aligned with my observations of their recorded interactions and the differential access to information Daniel had maintained. The security footage had shown Megan comfortably inhabiting my home, but had never captured her participating in document preparation or financial discussions. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked directly. "Because I've been interviewed by the bank's fraud department," she replied. "They're investigating potential criminal charges against Daniel, and they asked about my involvement. I wanted you to know I've told them everything, including that I was misled about your knowledge and consent." This development created an unexpected alignment of interests, Megan distancing herself from Daniel's financial fraud while providing additional testimony that might strengthen potential prosecution. Her self-protective candor potentially offered leverage I hadn't anticipated. "What do you want from me, Ms. Ross?" I maintained formal address, creating necessary distance. "Nothing," she replied. Her voice faltered momentarily. "I thought you deserved to know I wasn't party to the forgery. The rest, moving into your home, the relationship, that's different. I knew he was married but believed you were separating. It was wrong regardless, but not criminal." This distinction between ethical misconduct and criminal action paralleled my own evolving thoughts about appropriate consequences. There was harm to be addressed, amends to be made, but the specific nature of those consequences mattered. "Thank you for the clarification," I responded neutrally. "Is there anything else?" "Just that I've moved out of the condo," she added. "I can't live in a property purchased with fraudulent funds. I've told Daniel our relationship is over until the legal issues are resolved, which—" She paused. "Well, that seems unlikely given what's coming to light." After ending the call, I returned to my analysis of the discovered documents with fresh perspective. Daniel had constructed an elaborate fantasy future that now lay in ruins, not because of my actions, but because of his own. The professional. Dream represented by the Westridge development, the personal relationship with Megan, the continued occupation of our home, all now compromised or lost through the collapse of his deceptive framework. Criminal prosecution would certainly deliver formal justice, but it would also potentially destroy the architectural project that had apparently meant enough to risk everything else. The question I needed to resolve was whether that destruction served my interests or merely added another layer of wreckage to an already damaged situation. By morning, I had reached clarity about my preferred resolution. I contacted Patricia with specific instructions, then arranged a meeting with the bank's fraud investigation team. My approach would surprise them, perhaps even disappoint those expecting retributive justice, but it aligned perfectly with my emerging understanding of what I truly valued moving forward. As I prepared for these meetings, I realized I was designing something more significant than the reconstruction of my living space or the resolution of legal proceedings. I was drafting the blueprint for my post-betrayal life, one constructed not from reactive emotion, but from deliberate consideration of the foundation I wanted to build upon moving forward. The storage unit containing my carefully preserved possessions represented physical artifacts I could selectively reclaim. The legal options before me represented justice I could calibrate according to my actual priorities, rather than abstract principles. The home I would eventually re-inhabit represented space I could redesign, according to authentic preferences, rather than compromised accommodations. Daniel had attempted to orchestrate my replacement and erasure. The most powerful response wasn't punishment, but redesign, creating a future so authentically aligned with my values and capabilities that his miscalculation would be rendered not just unethical, but absurd. The conference room at First Meridian Bank exuded corporate neutrality, recessed lighting, ergonomic chairs, and the faint scent of coffee from an elaborate machine in the corner. The fraud investigation team had assembled a comprehensive case, file, document examinations, transaction records, forensic financial analysis. Their expressions conveyed the professional satisfaction of investigators who had constructed an airtight case. "Ms. Weber, thank you for meeting with us," began Hector Ramirez, the lead investigator. "We've completed our preliminary investigation and found clear evidence of signature forgery, identity misrepresentation, and financial fraud. Given the dollar amount involved and the premeditated nature of these actions, we're preparing to refer this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." I nodded, acknowledging their thoroughness while maintaining my composed exterior. "I appreciate your diligence. Before you proceed with criminal referral, I'd like to propose an alternative resolution that addresses the bank's financial concerns while allowing me greater control over the outcome." Ramirez exchanged glances with the bank's legal representative, their expressions revealing skepticism. "We're obligated to report financial fraud of this magnitude, Ms. Weber. It's not merely a matter of institutional policy but regulatory compliance." "I understand," I replied, opening the portfolio containing my proposal. "However, I believe we can structure a resolution that serves the bank's interests more effectively than criminal prosecution, while providing appropriate consequences for the fraud." Over the next 30 minutes, I outlined my proposed approach. Daniel would acknowledge the forgery in a legally binding statement and transfer his 30% ownership stake in the Westridge commercial. Development to me as partial restitution. This equity would serve as security against the fraudulently obtained HELOC, with all development proceeds directed toward loan repayment until fully satisfied. Meanwhile, I would assume proper responsibility for the loan with restructured payment terms reflecting the circumstances of its origination. This approach provides several advantages over criminal prosecution, I explained. The bank recovers the full loan amount plus interest, rather than potentially losing value through property foreclosure. The development project continues, preserving jobs and community investment, rather than collapsing through legal entanglement. And I receive appropriate compensation while maintaining control over how this situation impacts my professional and personal reputation. The legal representative, a shrewd woman named Teresa Kwan, studied the proposal with narrowed eyes. This is unorthodox. What makes you confident Mr. Weber would agree to these terms rather than taking his chances with legal defense? Because criminal prosecution would destroy the architectural project that apparently matters enough to him that he was willing to commit fraud to finance it, I responded. My proposal allows the development to continue under new partial ownership while removing the threat of criminal record that would effectively end his professional career. It's hardly leniency, but it's a pragmatic alternative to mutually assured destruction. The discussion continued, with the bank representatives raising technical concerns that Patricia and I had anticipated and addressed in the detailed proposal. By meeting's end, they had agreed to present our approach to senior management, temporarily pausing criminal referral pending final approval. As we gathered our materials, Ramirez asked the question that lingered beneath the professional negotiations. May I ask, Ms. Weber, why this approach? Most fraud victims in your position want to see the perpetrator prosecuted, especially given the personal betrayal involved. I considered his question carefully, recognizing it deserved an honest response. Criminal prosecution would certainly deliver justice in abstract terms, but it wouldn't necessarily provide what I personally need to move forward. This approach delivers concrete restitution, professional consequence proportionate to the offense, and, perhaps most importantly, allows me to direct the narrative rather than becoming a passive participant in another process that happens. To me, his expression reflected understanding beyond professional assessment. You're refusing to be defined by victimhood. Precisely, I acknowledged. I'm designing the resolution that best serves my actual interests rather than accepting prescribed responses to standardized offenses. From the bank, I proceeded directly to Patricia's office, where she had arranged a mediation session with Daniel and his attorney, Martin Finch, a corporate specialist clearly uncomfortable with the personal dimensions of this case. Daniel himself appeared markedly different from our last encounter. The confident manipulator replaced by someone visibly strained, his usual impeccable appearance showing subtle signs of neglect. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Patricia began, establishing the formal structure for our negotiation. Ms. Weber has prepared a settlement proposal that offers an alternative to the criminal charges currently pending with the district attorney. As Patricia outlined my terms, the transfer of Daniel's ownership stake in Westridge Development, complete relinquishment of any claim to our home, transparent financial accounting of all assets acquired during our marriage, and formally acknowledged statement of forgery and fraud. I observed his reactions carefully. Initial relief at the prospect of avoiding criminal prosecution gave way to calculated assessment of what he stood to lose. The ownership stake in Westridge represented years of professional investment and potential future returns. Surrendering it constituted significant penalty, yet preserved his professional reputation and freedom, a severe cost that nonetheless left him something to rebuild from. His attorney requested a brief recess to confer privately. When they returned, Finch presented their counter-proposal. Reduced ownership transfer, 15% rather than the full 30%, extended timeline for property division, and modified language in the formal acknowledgement that admitted improper financial behavior without explicit admission of criminal fraud. Patricia and I had anticipated this negotiating position and prepared our response. "The ownership stake is non-negotiable," Patricia stated firmly. "The 30% equity represents approximate value of the fraudulently obtained funds, plus compensation for associated damages. If your client prefers different terms, we can certainly return to the bank's original plan for criminal referral." The negotiations continued with the detailed precision of architectural specifications, each provision carefully structured to balance accountability with practicality. Throughout, I maintained professional detachment, treating the dissolution of my marriage as the complex project management challenge it had become, rather than the emotional catastrophe it could have been. By late afternoon, we had reached agreement on comprehensive settlement terms that would be submitted for court approval. Daniel would transfer his ownership stake in Westridge Development, relinquish all claims to our home, provide complete financial accounting, and acknowledge the forgery in explicit terms that protected me from any future liability while stopping short of language that would automatically trigger criminal prosecution. As our attorneys finalized the documentation, Daniel finally addressed me directly, his tone oscillating between defensiveness and attempted justification. "You have to understand, Caroline, the Westridge project represented everything I've worked toward professionally. When the capital requirements increased unexpectedly, I felt trapped. The traditional financing options would have diluted my ownership stake to practically nothing. So instead of discussing this with me, your partner, you chose elaborate fraud," I observed without inflection. "I convinced myself you wouldn't understand the opportunity," he continued, revealing the fundamental miscalculation beneath his actions. "Your museum work is so different from commercial development. You've never seemed interested in my architectural ambitions beyond the aesthetic elements." This assessment, so dramatically misaligned with my actual capabilities and interests, illuminated the profound disconnect that had apparently existed beneath our seemingly functional partnership. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me, he had fundamentally misunderstood me, reducing my professional acumen to superficial aesthetic appreciation, rather than recognizing the strategic thinking and project management expertise that defined my curatorial work. "That misjudgment has proven expensive," I noted simply. "Not just financially, but in every meaningful dimension of your life." His expression revealed momentary recognition of this truth, that his elaborate plan had collapsed not through bad luck, but inherent fatal flaws. He had constructed an exit strategy based on fundamental misreading of my capabilities. Planning. His deception, as though orchestrating a minor gallery exhibition, rather than preparing for the forensic authentication expertise that defined my professional identity. As our attorneys returned with final documents requiring signatures, Daniel made one last attempt at personal connection. "For what it's worth, I never intended things to unfold this way. Megan was supposed to be a temporary arrangement until the Westridge project launched, and I could approach our separation from financial strength." The conditional nature of his planned honesty, contingent on reaching financial security through dishonest means, perfectly encapsulated the ethical bankruptcy that had corroded our relationship long before I discovered the tangible evidence of betrayal. "Your intentions are irrelevant," I replied, signing the settlement agreement with the same careful precision I applied to acquisition documentation for museum collections. "The provenance of this situation is established through actions, not retrospective justifications." With the formal settlement complete, I left the legal offices without backward glance, driving directly to the house, my house now by uncontested legal definition. The locksmith had completed the security upgrades, providing new entry codes and electronic keys that established definitive boundary between previous ownership and current possession. The interior remained in the curious transitional state I had documented earlier. Neither my original home nor Megan's aggressive modernization, but strange hybrid of absent elements and abandoned interventions. Rather than finding this liminality unsettling, I recognized its perfect symbolism for my current circumstances. A space of possibility defined not by what remained, but by what could now be created without constraint. I moved through each room, methodically, not with the investigative attention of my previous visit, but with designer's visualization of potential transformations. The emptied living room could become a gallery-like space for rotating displays from my art collection. The kitchen could be reconfigured to accommodate both serious cooking and casual entertaining. The master bedroom could incorporate elements from my travels, textiles, artifacts, and photographs currently preserved in climate-controlled storage. This mental redesign represented more than aesthetic preferences. It embodied fundamental recalibration of how I wished to inhabit my life moving forward. The spaces Daniel and I had negotiated through compromise could now be authentically expressed, according to my unfiltered vision. The professional separation between museum curation and personal environment could be selectively dissolved, allowing my expertise to transform private space with the same attentive consideration I applied to exhibition design. Standing in what had been Daniel's home office, the room that had remained unchanged amid broader disruption, I made my first concrete decision. This space would become my personal studio, where curatorial projects could develop alongside private, creative pursuits I had previously relegated to limited weekend hours. The rigid boundary between professional identity and personal expression that had characterized my married life could now become appropriately permeable. As evening approached, I moved through final practical tasks, updating home insurance to remove Daniel as covered individual, scheduling initial consultation with interior designer who specialized in working with art collectors, arranging for selected items from storage to be delivered for first phase reoccupation. Each action represented not just logistical necessity, but deliberate step toward transformed living. Patricia called as I was preparing to leave, confirming that the bank had provisionally accepted our settlement approach, pending final documentation of the West Ridge development ownership transfer. "They're impressed with your strategic thinking," she noted. "The head of their fraud department mentioned they occasionally have positions for professionals with your analytical skills, should you ever consider career change." This unexpected outcome, potential professional opportunity emerging from what could have been merely personal catastrophe, perfectly illustrated the generative possibilities that emerged when difficult situations were approached with design. Thinking rather than reactive emotion. "An interesting development," I observed. "Though I expect the museum will keep me thoroughly engaged for the foreseeable future. We've just received confirmation of a major acquisition I've been pursuing for nearly 3 years." After ending the call, I made one final circuit of the house, not as the space it had been or the space it would become, but as the threshold between those realities. In the fading evening light, I could almost visualize the ghost images of its previous incarnation overlaid with translucent renderings of potential futures, a palimpsest of endings and beginnings occupying the same physical dimensions. Tomorrow would bring practical challenges, coordinating with the museum about modified return date from bereavement leave, meeting with financial advisors about managing the newly acquired development stake, continuing the process of reclaiming and reimagining personal space. But tonight, standing in this emptied house that now unquestionably belonged to me alone, I experienced something beyond the professional satisfaction of successfully navigated negotiation. I felt the quiet exhilaration of liberation, not just from betrayal or deception, but from the subtle constraints of compromise that had gradually narrowed my self-expression. The difficult circumstances that had unfolded during my most vulnerable moment had paradoxically created opportunity for expansion rather than diminishment, for authentic recalibration rather than mere recovery. As I prepared to leave for my hotel one final time before beginning actual reoccupation, I noticed something I had overlooked during previous visits: a small cardboard box in the kitchen, labeled Caroline's office, in Daniel's architectural handwriting. Unlike the carefully cataloged items in storage, this box had apparently been left behind during the hasty evacuation. Its contents proved revelatory. Journals and sketchbooks from early in our relationship, professional awards I had received but minimized to avoid overshadowing Daniel's accomplishments, preliminary designs for exhibition spaces I had conceptualized but never formally proposed. Each item represented some aspect of myself I had unconsciously reduced or contained to maintain the equilibrium of our partnership. This archaeological evidence of my own adaptive diminishment created the final clarifying perspective on what had occurred. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me through deception. He had failed to recognize the full dimension of who I actually was, the capabilities, ambitions, and perspectives that constituted my complete identity beyond the carefully modulated version I had presented within our marriage. His replacement plan had targeted a projection of his own creation rather than my authentic self. The woman he had attempted to erase was already a reduced version of my potential, a circumstance I had participated in creating through incremental accommodations and unconscious compressions of my natural expression. The most meaningful response to his betrayal wasn't punitive justice, but expansive reclamation, not just of physical space or financial assets, but of the uncompromised identity I had gradually adjusted to maintain relational harmony. The settlement agreement secured appropriate consequences for specific actions, but the true resolution would unfold through how I chose to inhabit my reclaimed life moving forward. As I packed away these recovered artifacts of my compressed self, I recognized that the security cameras that had revealed Daniel's betrayal had provided something far more valuable than mere evidence of deception. They had offered unexpected opportunity to see myself clearly, to recognize both what had been taken from me and what I had relinquished before any external loss occurred. The most important restoration ahead involved neither furniture arrangements nor legal proceedings, but deliberate reclamation of aspects of myself that had been carefully set aside during years of partnership. The home I would recreate would reflect not just aesthetic preferences, but authentic expression of capabilities too long contained by unnecessary compromise. Daniel's elaborately orchestrated replacement plan had failed not just through practical miscalculation, but through fundamental misunderstanding of who he was actually attempting to replace. The woman who had uncovered his deception and navigated its resolution possessed capabilities he had neither recognized nor valued, capacities for strategic thinking, authentication expertise, and design vision that had ultimately transformed potential victimhood into opportunity for profound recalibration. 2 weeks after finalizing the settlement agreement, I found myself standing in what had once been Daniel's home office, now transformed into the beginning of my personal studio. The built-in shelving that had housed his architectural references now displayed artifacts from museum collections I had curated, not the valuable pieces themselves, of course, but study models, exhibition mock-ups, and representative samples that told the story of my professional journey. The morning light filtered through newly installed window treatments designed to protect sensitive materials while maximizing natural illumination. The sterile white walls had been repainted in a warm, neutral tone specifically selected to showcase rotating artwork without competing for visual attention. The space breathed with possibility rather than constraint. Eliza arrived precisely at 9, carrying a portfolio of conservation assessments for items recovered from storage. Her expression reflected professional focus layered with personal concern as she surveyed the gradually transforming interior. "The structural reconfiguration looks promising," she observed, referring to the preliminary work underway to remove a non-load-bearing wall between the former office and adjacent guest room. "Will you keep the existing flooring?" "No," I replied, unrolling the design plans across my newly installed work table. "I'm replacing it with museum-grade sustainable bamboo that better accommodates both display requirements and creative work. The installation begins next week." Eliza nodded approvingly, her conservator's eye recognizing the technical specifications that went beyond typical residential renovations. "You're creating a true working studio, not just a home office." "Exactly. The distinction matters." I gestured toward the conservation assessments she had brought. "What's the verdict on the textiles?" We spent the next hour reviewing the condition of items recovered from storage, particularly the ceremonial textiles I had collected during research expeditions in Peru and Mexico. Most had survived their abrupt relocation without damage, though several required humidity stabilization after exposure to suboptimal storage conditions. As we completed our review, Eliza hesitated before asking the question that clearly weighed on her. "How are you actually doing, Caroline? Beyond the professional management of all this?" The question deserved authentic response rather than deflection. "I'm experiencing an unexpected form of liberation," I admitted. "Not just from betrayal or deception, but from patterns of compromise I hadn't fully recognized until they were disrupted." "What do you mean?" I gestured toward the half-transformed space around us. "I've spent my career ensuring the authentic preservation and presentation of artistic expression. I apply rigorous standards to determine provenance, to validate authenticity, to create optimal contexts for interpretation. Yet I gradually accepted incremental diminishment of my own authentic expression within my marriage." Eliza nodded with the perceptive understanding of long friendship. "The curator became part of someone else's collection." "Precisely, and not particularly well curated at that." This observation carried no bitterness, merely analytical accuracy. What initially presents as devastating betrayal has actually created opportunity for recalibration I might never have initiated otherwise. Our conversation shifted to practical matters: scheduled delivery of specially constructed display cases, coordinated timing for electrical upgrades to support proper lighting systems, security enhancements for valuable pieces I intended to rotate from my personal collection. Throughout, I maintained the focused attention to detail that had defined my professional success while applying it to my personal environment for perhaps the first time without unconscious constraint. After Eliza departed, I reviewed communications that had arrived during our consultation. The bank had formally approved our settlement approach, with documentation reflecting Daniel's ownership transfer in the Westridge development now properly recorded with regulatory authorities. Patricia had forwarded confirmation that all remaining HELOC funds had been frozen pending allocation toward development costs, with structured repayment terms now legally established. Most significantly, an unexpected email had arrived from Westridge Development's managing partner, Alexandra Tanner, requesting meeting to discuss my newly acquired ownership stake. Her message conveyed professional courtesy layered with evident curiosity about my sudden appearance among the project investors. I scheduled the meeting for the following afternoon at my office in the museum, rather than suggesting neutral territory. This deliberate choice established professional context for our interaction, while subtly communicating that my involvement with Westridge represented extension of existing expertise rather than uncomfortable adaptation to unfamiliar territory. The remainder of my day involved finalizing exhibition documentation for an upcoming show featuring contemporary Indigenous artists, work that had been interrupted by my mother's illness and subsequent events. Immersing myself in this familiar, professional rhythm provided welcome counterbalance to the continuing personal recalibrations unfolding in parallel. My return to the museum after bereavement leave had generated supportive responses from colleagues who knew about my mother's passing, but remained unaware of the marital dissolution occurring simultaneously. I had chosen selective transparency, sharing the fact of my separation without elaborate detail about circumstances. This boundary preserved professional focus while acknowledging significant personal transition. The museum director, Gabrielle Ortiz, had been particularly supportive, restructuring exhibition timelines to accommodate my interrupted workflow while offering institutional resources that might ease my transition. The museum's conservation storage remains available for as long as you need, he assured me. And if you require scheduling flexibility to manage personal matters, just let me know. His support reflected more than professional courtesy. It demonstrated recognition of my institutional value that contrasted sharply with Daniel's fundamental misreading of my capabilities. Where Daniel had perceived my curatorial expertise as narrow specialization, Gabriel consistently acknowledged the transferable strategic thinking and project management skills that made me valuable beyond specific exhibitions. This contrasting perception illuminated another dimension of recalibration now unfolding, not just reclaiming physical space or asserting financial rights, but consciously gravitating toward relationships and environments that recognized rather than reduced my complete professional identity. The following afternoon, I welcomed Alexandra Tanner to my museum office with the composed professionalism that had become my emotional center of gravity. Her initial assessment was evident in her careful observation of the space, taking in the meticulous organization, the thoughtfully arranged artifacts, the subtle indications of curatorial precision applied to working environment as well as exhibition spaces. "Thank you for making time to meet, Dr. Weber," she began, her tone conveying calibrated respect without excessive formality. The ownership transfer documents were somewhat unexpected. "I imagine so," I acknowledged, though perhaps less surprising than discovering one's signature has been forged on loan documents during one's mother's funeral. This direct reference to circumstances underlying our meeting momentarily disrupted her professional composure. "I wasn't aware of those specific details. Few people are," I assured her. "And I prefer to focus on constructive resolution rather than dwelling on circumstances that created our current situation." Alexandra nodded, visibly recalibrating her approach. "Then let's discuss Westridge directly. Your ownership stake represents significant investment in a specialized commercial development. Given your background in museum curation rather than commercial real estate, I wondered about your intentions for this stake." Her question contained reasonable professional inquiry, layered with subtle assessment of potential disruption to established project dynamics. Would I be a passive investor seeking only financial returns? An emotional stakeholder demanding changes to compensate for personal grievances? A temporary participant looking to liquidate ownership at first opportunity? "My intentions are straightforward," I replied. "I expect to be meaningfully involved in a project now partially funded through my assets, particularly regarding design elements that affect visitor experience and community integration. I bring specialized expertise in creating environments that engage diverse audiences while respecting historical and cultural contexts, capabilities directly relevant to Westridge's mixed-use concept." This response, substantive rather than defensive, focusing on value contribution rather than ownership rights, visibly shifted Alexandra's perception. Her expression transitioned from diplomatic management of potential complication to recognition of unexpected opportunity. "That's actually extremely relevant," she acknowledged. "We've been struggling with precisely those elements of the design. The architectural vision works beautifully on paper, but lacks cohesive visitor journey and community connection. Daniel is brilliant with structural innovation, but less experienced with experiential design." This assessment aligned with what I had already intuited from reviewing the Westridge documentation, that the project embodied technical excellence, while lacking the intuitive understanding of human interaction with designed environments that distinguished truly exceptional spaces from merely competent ones. "Perhaps we could review the current design challenges," I suggested. "I'd like to understand where my expertise might be most constructively applied." Over the next hour, Alexandra shared detailed renderings and planning documents, highlighting specific areas where the development team had encountered conceptual barriers. The central plaza lacked intuitive flow between commercial and residential elements. The community spaces felt disconnected from surrounding neighborhood context. The proposed gallery areas for rotating art installations seemed superficially incorporated rather than meaningfully integrated. As she described these challenges, I recognized opportunity to apply curatorial principles beyond traditional museum contexts, considering visitor journey, thematic coherence, and authentic cultural integration in commercial environment. The very expertise Daniel had apparently considered irrelevant to his architectural ambitions now represented potential solution to the project's most significant design limitations. "I see several approaches that might address these issues," I offered, sketching conceptual alternatives on tracing paper overlaid on the existing plans. The plaza could incorporate narrative elements that guide movement while referencing neighborhood history. The community spaces could feature commissioned works by local artists that transform functional elements into cultural connection points. The gallery areas could be reimagined as integrated exhibition pathways rather than isolated display zones. Alexandra studied these preliminary suggestions with growing interest. "This perspective is precisely what we've been missing. Would you be willing to join our design review session next week?" The full development team meets Thursdays to address ongoing challenges. I agreed to participate, recognizing this engagement represented more than professional courtesy. It marked a transitional moment where what had begun as unwelcome complication in her project management now shifted toward potential enhancement, where my involvement transformed from obligation necessitated by legal settlement to valuable contribution based on relevant expertise. After Alexandra departed with tentative redesign concepts for team consideration, I reflected on the evolving dimensions of resolution unfolding through these interactions. The settlement agreement had secured appropriate financial recalibration, but these professional engagements represented something more significant: opportunities to apply my capabilities in contexts previously considered beyond my relevant sphere. That evening, returning to my gradually transforming home, I received an unexpected message from the museum director. Gabriel had been contacted by representatives from the Westridge development regarding potential collaboration on the project's cultural elements. His message conveyed both professional interest and personal concern. "Is this connection related to your recent personal circumstances? No pressure to discuss, but available if you want to talk through institutional implications." His perceptive inquiry acknowledged potential complexity without presuming detailed knowledge of my private situation. My response maintained appropriate boundaries while confirming meaningful connection. "Yes, it's related to my settlement agreement, though evolving in unexpected directions. The development includes significant cultural installation space that could provide meaningful partnership opportunities for the museum. Happy to discuss potential institutional involvement if you see merit in exploring collaboration." This exchange represented another dimension of recalibration, the integration of previously segregated professional spheres. Where Daniel had perceived my museum work as separate from and irrelevant to his architectural projects, this emerging collaboration recognized natural complementarity between our respective fields. The very expertise he had discounted now connected institutions and initiatives that might otherwise have remained disconnected. As I concluded correspondence and prepared for evening reflection time, my phone chimed with notification from the security system. The cameras had detected movement at the front entrance, delivery of custom storage cabinets scheduled for installation in my developing studio space. I watched remotely as the installation team carefully navigated the specially designed units through the front entrance. These cabinets represented another manifestation of recalibrated living, custom elements I had long envisioned but never implemented due to compromises inherent in shared space. Their arrival signified not just physical transformation of environment, but conscious prioritization of professional needs I had previously accommodated through makeshift adaptations. Observing this delivery through the same security system that had revealed Daniel's betrayal created perfect symmetry. Technology that had documented dismantling of one life now witnessed methodical construction of another. The cameras that had recorded my systematic replacement now documented my deliberate reclamation and thoughtful enhancement of physical space, aligned with authentic capabilities. This moment crystallized understanding that had been gradually forming throughout recent weeks. What had initially presented as devastating personal betrayal during period of acute vulnerability had paradoxically created pathway to more authentic expression of my complete professional identity. The painful disruption of established patterns had revealed not just Daniel's deception, but my own unconscious accommodation to unnecessary limitations. The most meaningful recalibration unfolding wasn't the financial settlement, legal resolution, or even physical reclamation of living space. It was the conscious integration of professional capabilities and personal environment, the deliberate removal of artificial boundaries between curatorial expertise and lived experience. The transformed house was becoming not restoration of what had been, but manifestation of what could now be created without unnecessary compromise. As evening settled around my evolving home, I reviewed preliminary sketches for the next phase of renovation, transformation of the master bedroom suite into space that better reflected my aesthetic sensibilities and practical needs. The design incorporated elements from my international travels alongside dedicated areas for private creative exploration, distinct from public-facing professional work. These plans represented more than cosmetic updates to physical environment. They embodied fundamental shift from adaptive accommodation toward authentic expression, from space designed through negotiated compromise to environment that genuinely reflected and supported my complete identity. The recalibration unfolding through these renovations manifested not just in changing physical arrangements, but in transformed relationship with my own capabilities and requirements. The Westridge Development Planning Session unfolded in a sleek conference room on the 23rd floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Portland's evolving skyline, a visual reminder of how architectural vision shapes collective experience of urban environments. Around the polished conference table sat professionals whose specialized expertise converged to transform conceptual renderings into physical reality. Structural engineers discussing load-bearing capacities, sustainability consultants analyzing environmental impact metrics, financial analysts tracking projected costs against established budgets. Daniel, as lead architect, should have occupied the central position in this collaborative ecosystem. His conspicuous absence created momentary awkwardness as Alexandra introduced me to the assembled team. Dr. Weber joins us through somewhat unconventional circumstances, she explained with diplomatic understatement. However, her expertise in exhibition design and visitor experience offers valuable perspective for addressing our current challenges with public engagement elements. The team's initial reactions revealed professional curiosity, layered with evident uncertainty about my role, particularly given my ownership stake that positioned me as both collaborator and investor. Their polite welcomes carried subtle assessment. Was I there to disrupt established processes? To enforce personal agenda through financial leverage? To complicate already complex project dynamics? These reasonable concerns dissolved as the working session progressed. When the interior design lead presented challenge of creating cohesive visitor journey through disparate commercial spaces, I offered concrete suggestions drawn from museum exhibition principles, considering narrative flow, transitional elements, and integrated wayfinding that transformed physical navigation into meaningful experience. When the landscape architect described difficulty connecting exterior plazas with surrounding neighborhood context, I shared techniques developed through community engagement exhibitions, creating permeable boundaries that invited participation, while respecting distinct identities of adjacent spaces. When the public art coordinator expressed frustration with disconnected installation locations, I suggested rethinking discrete artwork placements as interrelated cultural journey that could draw visitors through commercial spaces while creating distinctive identity for the development. Throughout these interactions, I maintained focused attention on substantive contribution rather than ownership position. My suggestions acknowledged existing expertise while offering complementary perspectives that expanded rather than replaced. Established approaches. The project's needs, not my personal circumstances, remained central focus of each intervention. By session's midpoint, The initial wariness had visibly transformed. Team members began actively soliciting my input on challenges beyond strictly cultural elements. The retail consultant requested perspective on creating more engaging storefront displays. The signage designer sought input on balancing information clarity with aesthetic integration. The lighting specialist asked about techniques for directing attention through illumination strategies. As we completed review of current challenges, Alexandra initiated forward planning discussion. Given the valuable perspectives Dr. Weber has provided today, I propose establishing formal role for her ongoing involvement beyond investor status. Perhaps as cultural integration consultant working directly with design implementation teams. The group's enthusiastic agreement confirmed the transformation in perception that had occurred during our single working session. What had begun as obligatory accommodation of unexpected investor had evolved into genuine appreciation for relevant expertise that addressed existing project limitations. This professional validation represented significant milestone in my ongoing recalibration. Daniel's fundamental misperception that my curatorial expertise existed in separate realm from his architectural work had been definitively contradicted by the very team assembled to execute his design vision. The capabilities he had diminished were now actively sought by professionals implementing project that represented his primary professional ambition. The session concluded with concrete next steps, scheduled reviews of specific design elements where my input had been deemed particularly valuable, integration of cultural planning into core project timeline rather than supplementary consideration, establishment of formal communication channels between Westridge development team and museum specialists who might provide additional expertise. As we gathered materials following the session, the sustainability consultant approached with professional curiosity. Your perspective on visitor experience sequence has interesting parallels with our work on intuitive energy conservation features. Would you be open to follow-up conversation about potential integration strategies? This invitation to cross-disciplinary collaboration perfectly exemplified the emerging pattern. Expertise initially acquired within specialized museum context, demonstrating unexpected relevance across broader environmental design applications. My response acknowledged this productive intersection. Absolutely. The principles of guiding attention and creating intuitive engagement apply equally to cultural, perception, and sustainability practices. Leaving the conference building, I experienced the particular satisfaction that accompanies authentic professional contribution. The awareness that specific capabilities honed through years of dedicated practice have generated value beyond their original context. This satisfaction differed fundamentally from validation sought through external approval. It emerged from internal alignment between developed expertise and meaningful application. The afternoon found me at Portland Museum of Contemporary Art, consulting with Gabriel about potential institutional collaboration with Westridge Development. The museum director's interest had evolved from initial concern about personal circumstances to genuine engagement with professional opportunity. The integrated exhibition pathways you've described could provide extraordinary opportunity to showcase works that don't fit traditional gallery contexts, he observed, reviewing preliminary concepts I had developed following the morning planning session, particularly for installation pieces that benefit from natural movement patterns of non-museum audiences. Exactly, I agreed. And the scheduled rotation of featured works creates ongoing connection points with surrounding communities rather than static installations that become effectively invisible through familiarity. We explored practical considerations, curatorial oversight requirements, conservation considerations for non-traditional display environments, potential funding mechanisms for commissioned works. Throughout our discussion, Gabriel demonstrated characteristic respect for my expertise while offering institutional perspective that expanded individual viewpoint. This collaborative exchange highlighted another dimension of ongoing recalibration: professional relationships that recognized and valued my complete capabilities rather than constraining them to predefined parameters. Where Daniel had unconsciously narrowed his perception of my expertise to fit his preconceived understanding, Gabriel consistently acknowledged expansive application of curatorial principles beyond traditional boundaries. The contrast between these approaches had always existed, but became starkly apparent through recent events. What initially presented as personal betrayal had revealed more fundamental misalignment: partnership with someone who fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued my professional identity versus collaborative relationships that recognized and expanded my capabilities. As our meeting concluded, Gabriel offered observation that extended beyond immediate project discussion. "You seem different since returning from leave, more integrated somehow. The professional precision is still there, but with new dimensions I hadn't fully recognized before." His perception reflected external manifestation of internal recalibration unfolding through these weeks of transformation. The careful compartmentalization that had characterized my previous professional approach, maintaining distinct boundaries between museum work, personal creative exploration, and domestic life, had begun dissolving in favor of more cohesive expression across contexts. Life changes have necessitated reevaluation of several established patterns, I acknowledged without elaborating on specific circumstances. The result appears to be more authentic integration of capabilities previously kept separate. Returning home that evening, I found contractors completing initial phase of studio renovation. The removed wall between former office and guest room had created expansive space for combined work and display environment. New electrical systems accommodated museum-grade lighting for rotating personal collection pieces. Custom storage units provided appropriate preservation for artifacts previously confined to climate-controlled facilities. The transformation of physical space paralleled internal recalibration, removing artificial divisions that had constrained authentic expression, installing infrastructure that supported complete capabilities, creating environment where previously separated aspects of identity could productively interact. As contractors departed, I unpacked first selection of pieces from museum storage, artifacts specifically chosen to inaugurate this integrated living and working environment. Each item represented aspect of professional journey that had previously remained segregated from home environment. Exhibition maquette from my first major curatorial project. Research materials from fieldwork in Oaxacan textile communities. Preliminary sketches for installation that had transformed visitor engagement metrics for the museum's contemporary wing. Arranging these pieces within newly configured space represented more than decorative decision or nostalgic display. It constituted deliberate integration of professional accomplishment and personal environment. Conscious rejection of arbitrary boundaries between distinct aspects of identity in favor of cohesive expression across contexts. The evening's final communication arrived from Alexandra. Message confirming formal consultant role with Westridge Development and requesting participation in upcoming presentation to community stakeholders. Her message concluded with observation that transcended professional courtesy. "Your contributions today transformed what had been contentious design challenges into compelling opportunities. The team is genuinely excited about implementation." This validation of specific expertise carried particular significance coming from unexpected source connected to circumstances that had initially presented as devastating setback. The very project that Daniel had concealed through elaborate deception now provided platform for capabilities he had fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued. The irony contained no bitterness, only recognition of how profoundly he had misperceived both my capabilities and his own interests. The expertise he had dismissed as irrelevant to his architectural vision now addressed core challenges in his signature project. The partnership he had systematically dismantled might have provided exactly the complementary perspective his work actually required. As I prepared for evening reflection time in newly transformed space, unexpected delivery arrived. Package from the museum's conservation department containing journals recovered from storage. These personal notebooks documented thought processes behind exhibition designs, curatorial decisions, and research methodologies developed throughout my career. Reviewing these materials in my integrated studio space created perfect symmetry. Historical documentation of professional development now informing environment designed for future growth. The continuity between past accomplishment and emerging possibilities highlighted fundamental truth about current transformation. What appeared externally as response to betrayal actually represented long-deferred alignment with authentic capabilities. The journals revealed pattern previously unrecognized in conscious awareness. Consistent impulse toward integrated application of curatorial principles across diverse contexts, repeatedly deferred in favor of specialized focus within institutional parameters. The seeds of current transformation had existed throughout professional journey, requiring only appropriate conditions for germination and growth. This recognition shifted perception of recent events from reactive response to catalytic opportunity, not merely recovering from deliberate erasure, but activating potential previously constrained by unnecessary limitation. The betrayal that occurred during moment of acute vulnerability had paradoxically created conditions for more authentic expression than partnership had ultimately supported. As evening deepened around my transforming home, I completed preliminary plan for next exhibition. Innovative exploration of how traditional conservation techniques might inform contemporary sustainability practices. The concept integrated museum expertise with emerging priorities in architectural design, creating potential collaboration between previously disconnected professional communities. This exhibition concept represented perfect manifestation of recalibrated professional identity, drawing upon specialized knowledge while extending application beyond traditional parameters, maintaining curatorial precision while embracing broader relevance, preserving institutional excellence while transcending conventional boundaries. The security system briefly activated as environmental monitoring sensors adjusted to shifting evening temperatures. Technology that had revealed betrayal now supporting creation of optimized conditions for precious artifacts and ongoing creative work. This repurposing perfectly symbolized larger transformation unfolding. Tools originally acquired for one purpose, revealing unexpected value in entirely different application. Tomorrow would bring continued implementation of physical renovations, further development of Westridge consultation parameters, ongoing curatorial responsibilities at the museum. These parallel activities no longer represented competing demands requiring careful compartmentalization, but integrated expressions of cohesive professional identity finding appropriate application across diverse contexts. The most significant transformation occurring through these weeks extended beyond physical renovation, professional validation, or financial recalibration. It manifested in fundamental shift from externally defined limitations toward internally directed integration, from adaptive response to fragmented expectations toward authentic expression of complete capabilities across previously separated contexts. What had begun as devastating personal betrayal during moment of acute vulnerability had catalyzed renaissance of professional authenticity that might otherwise have remained indefinitely deferred. The security footage that documented systematic erasure had simultaneously created conditions for unprecedented integration of capabilities previously constrained by unnecessary compromise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.